So my name is Mitchell Black. I'm 24 years old. I'm from Pretoria. My background's in philosophy, and currently I work full-time in retail, but hopefully I'm going to be getting out of that really soon, and I'm honored to be here addressing all of you guys. I have an hour of your time, and for this hour what I'm going to be doing is starting off with what we like to start these sessions with, the introduction, which is looking at the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. We find that this is an awesome way to start off, to introduce you guys to the types of attitudes that you may well be exposed to when trying to engage individuals on the climate crisis. So I'll start there, then I'm going to move into the 10 principles, unpacking them. I'm hoping that that's going to be quite an interactive space, and then after doing that, I've got a brief run-through of, a very, very brief run-through of XR's timeline to date. Helene has a more in-depth version of that she will go through later on, and thereafter I believe we have a break. So, let's start with the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. I'm sure you've all heard of the 5 stages of grief, moving from denial to anger to bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. It's important to note that the Kubler-Ross grief cycle was designed and researched around the experience of death within a family, within a group, specifically with tragic events such as shootings or terrorist events. But for the first time in human history, we're grieving something that hasn't quite happened yet. It started, it's happening, we're starting to see its effects around the world, but we're in essence grieving our futures. We're grieving what could have been, should we not have lived in a system that actively destroys the world that creates all of us. So I'll move slowly through the entire cycle, starting off with shock, then moving into denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Shock and denial is the first phase that people are going to run into, and it's the biggest phase that's making the biggest counterpoint to a movement like Extinction Rebellion in the world right now. For example, about a week and a half ago, a group of denialists, 600 of them, came on and signed a letter saying that no, all of the scientists are wrong and that this isn't happening. But it's 600 denialists and politicians arguing against an open letter from 18,000 scientists. And it's a straight out denial that this could be happening to us, 1, and 2, that we are the ones causing it. So it's people that become overwhelmed with information, because if you start running down the climate rabbit hole, it's a non-stop thing. It hits you all the time, especially in the echo chambers that we find ourselves in on social media. You'll like one Facebook page, for example, that has to do with climate change, and the algorithms will naturally suggest to you more things along that line. And before you know it, your entire online presence is constantly bombarded with bad news about the climate. And shocking news, which is for the most part very true, and it is happening and it is shocking and we should be shocked about it, but it's our reaction to this that will define how we're going to engage with it going forward. So in this space is where you find, as I mentioned, the denialists. It's where you find the people who are blaming it on something else. Either the planet is too big. A popular one that comes up often, especially from middle, upper and upper class people, is that plain and simple there's too many people. Population is the real problem. That's why we have this issue. And I heard someone very eloquently put it the other day, is if you're saying population is the problem, you don't like poor people. Because the fact is that the 42 million wealthiest people on Earth emit more carbon into the atmosphere through their lifestyles than the poorest 3.5 billion. So the problem is not population. The Earth can sustain us quite easily up to a population of about 10 billion. The fact is that we have a group in society who is making a lot of money off of hurting the rest of us indirectly. The next denialism that comes up quite often is that this is a natural cycle. And it's important not to shut this down immediately, because there is a truth to it. There is a natural climate change cycle that occurs on Earth. And it is driven by the Earth's axis and changes in that and changes in our position relative to the sun. But the important thing to realize is that that natural climate change takes thousands of years to occur. What we are seeing right now has happened in the last 50 to 100 years, starting with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Approximately 70% of all of the carbon humanity has ever emitted into the environment has happened since the year I was born, 1995. So the rate of heating is increasing, the rate of climate change is not part of the natural cycle. So yes, there is a natural element, but at the end of the day, it's man-made. And this is what the scientists are shouting about. The next one is science will find a solution to the future. We don't have to worry about this. We just, it's not my problem. There's going to be some big breakthrough in science. And this is often what you'll see coming through from Silicon Valley CEOs, for example. They believe that we will solve artificial intelligence before the climate breaks down. And if we solve AI, it will solve power, and power will solve all of our problems. Unfortunately, we can't rely on that option happening. They seem very, very confident in it. But in my philosophy research, for example, I worked heavily in the artificial intelligence philosophy space, and there is absolutely no consensus about when AI is going to be a possible option or a possible solution to what we face. There's some people who say, no, we're a year away from AI, and there's a broad contingent that say, listen, we won't see it within the next 100 years. So it's the idea that science and technology will solve this problem for us is a long shot, and it's also a way of placing it away from ourselves, removing the problem from ourselves and not wanting to face the role that we play in the problem that we see. To this stage, the best way that you can deal with someone in denial or initial shock is, it's very dull in the bottom corner down there, but it is essentially information and communication. You have to continuously put forward to these people the facts that we know about climate change. You have to put forward to them the arguments like I've just done in response to the planet is too big, in response to population is the problem, in response to this is a natural cycle. These are existing denialist arguments, and there are very good schools of research that show us how we can combat those. So that's the first stage of grief. Following that comes anger. You are now you've moved past the fact that we can just deny this. You've accepted that it's a fact, but now you're just angry. How have we ended up in this situation? Why has this been allowed to be done to us by the 100 corporations on Earth are currently responsible for 70% of all of the emissions that happen on Earth? So you'll notice in Extinction Rebellion's rhetoric, what we talk about is criminal inaction by politicians. They are not just complicit, they are culpable. They have allowed this to happen. They have allowed corporations to ignore environmental protection measures. They have allowed lobbying efforts to roll back those measures, or at least keep them as minimal as possible in order to increase corporate profits. Politics and money are the same thing in our world, and that intersection is the problem. It often then becomes a them versus me dialogue that you'll have with these individuals. Why are you trying to tell me how I can live my life? What does it matter if I stop eating meat? People feel attacked at this point, and they, in return, will attack outwards. And the best way to deal with them is understanding that we are all responsible and telling them, listen, man, I'm not saying that it's your fault. Like you are the one causing climate change. But the lifestyle that you subscribe to, the lifestyle that we are all indoctrinated into living in the world, is what's causing the problem. You didn't choose to consume meat from a young age. You didn't choose to drive a car when you turned 18. This is just how society works. But we are quickly realizing that that is not how society can work if we are to survive the coming. If Extinction Rebellion for some reason doesn't work out, which it's gaining traction, it's going really well, but if we don't get the social change that we need, we're going to have to do things like give up motor transport. We're going to have to do things like stop eating meat. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to come to grips with, specifically in South Africa, where meat eating forms a massive part of our traditional cultures. Following from that stage comes bargaining. Bargaining is it's an interesting stage to engage with. It's the idea of I'm doing what I can, I'm doing as much as I can, what do you expect me to do? There's not much that I really can do. I'm doing X, I'm doing Y. And it's often the idea of, well, I mean, we'll sort this out over time. We can get long-term solutions in place. But the thing that people don't realize here is that, for example, the IPCC report, the International Panel on Climate Change, that report was was based on science which has come to be shown that it was not the most accurate. We have more results that have come out since the beginning of last year and show that the 12 years that they gave us to cut carbon emissions is a very conservative estimate. We don't have the time to think about long-term solutions. We have to do immediate things to try and cut carbon emissions now. And then the other response is the individualized response. I'll be fine, I'll manage, I'll make a plan with my family, I'll do this, I don't have to go out and protest. And that, at the end of the day, we're all going to run out of water. We're all going to struggle with food. So your individualized response can only go so far. We have to have our voices heard, we have to be on the streets, we have to engage in civil disobedience in large numbers in order to essentially get the people with the real power to do something. Bargaining can be dealt with through, again, information and communication. Then we move into the stage of depression. So we've gone through and we've said, this is what I'm doing, this is what I can do, and you start realizing, maybe it's not enough. This is a hopeless fight. And this was, I came to terms with or came to knowledge of the climate crisis only about 5.5, 6 months ago. And this has been the stage that has lasted the longest for me and has been the toughest to work through. It's the idea that how did I end up living like this? Why I can't change. I can't stop driving a car. I work on the other side of the city. It's my fault. I can't work with this. It's all of our fault, and it becomes an internalized hatred. It becomes, how can I live my life like this? How have I been complicit and guilty in creating the system? It's the idea, and this is often where people get caught up or where they get stuck, moving between depression and acceptance, is the give up stage. It's pointless. We can't do anything. Why are we fighting it? Let's pour ourselves into our corporate jobs. Let's try get as best of a life as we can in our lifetime and not try and fight it. And to get through this stage, you have to deal with emotional support. You have to be there for the people. You have to remind them, and this is why I'm so thankful to the people I've met in my time in XR, is that we can stop this. It's not beyond the point of no return yet. We have the possibility to fight what's coming and to hopefully turn the corner. And from a young person's perspective, engaging with all of the media in the world, it looks like we're turning a corner on an international scale. So we'll see. The presidential election in the US next year is a big thing. So at this point, I'm more optimistic than I was 3 or 4 months ago, but I still heavily recognize the need for civil disobedience and action in large numbers, and that's why we find ourselves here today. We've gone from our first SOS session, we maybe had 2 or 3 people here. Now we've got a full room, and hopefully we hope to increase those numbers, slowly but surely, on a reflecting cycle, which I'll talk about now in the when I go through the principles. We have the ability to do this, and the guys in the UK are showing us that we have the ability to do this, and we just need to see what they've done, see how we can work it in a South African context, and push ahead into the forge. Lastly is the stage that we all need to reach, which is acceptance. And it is a journey. As you can see, you go through the curve that you see there is emotions. It is high emotions to a low point, and you come out of it on the other side. And when you accept that it is possible to do something, when you take responsibility for the culpability that you have, where you say, I'm going to have to go vegan, I'm going to have to make that, and it is very difficult, but it is worth doing. You realize that you have to take action. You realize, and you can, for the first time, see a way through this. See a way that civil disobedience can change attitudes. And you can see, like today, XR has distanced themselves a little bit from the protest, but it's called the Heathrow Pause, which has been organized by XR people. And the idea is to fly drones at head height in shifts of 100 people with drones for 3 hours at a time, because as soon as you have a drone off the ground in a no-fly zone, Heathrow has to ground all of its planes. You don't fly them high enough to endanger people, but you fly them just at head height to stop the planes. So there's about 100,000 flights in the air every day around the world, and those 100,000 flights emit as much carbon into the atmosphere as the cumulative emissions of all 28 member states of the European Union. We do not understand in our day-to-day lives how much flying impacts the world and how much carbon it places into the upper atmosphere, where it is more destructive than cars on the ground. So the idea behind the Heathrow pause is pause. Force the world to stop for a second and think, what are we doing? What is our way forward? Do we want to live in a food scarce and water scarce future? Or are we going to come together for a greener, more connected, more spirit-filled human life? Which is what our regenerative culture advocates for. Then it is about mitigating what we can. As I said, smaller things in your own life. I personally believe the only real things you can ask the individual to do outside of civil disobedience is fly less. If you're young, have one less kid than you were planning to have. And try and eat a lot less meat, preferably go vegan, if at all possible. And then the last and best thing is what we see here, coming together to find a way forward. And this is where Extinction Rebellion and the movement gives us a space to do this. And it's not to say that Extinction Rebellion and climate activism is new in South Africa. We just seem to be gaining traction quite quickly. So that's an introduction to how you can interact with different perspectives on the climate crisis and people who find themselves at different points along the grief journey, to accepting that the future is not what we were sold when we were young. On a personal level, the thing that brought me to tears, and it really made me realize something, is I love sci-fi, I love technology. And I came to the realization that if we don't do something, sci-fi is never going to exist. We're never going to have Star Trek. And it hurt me on a deep level, because that's my passion and that's what I enjoy. And it's finding the unique ways in which the issue speaks to you. So that's just a quick introduction, and here we find ourselves in the point of guidance and direction.
Mitch, just on your sci-fi sadness, a friend of mine in Toulouse said recently, you know, it's really, really disappointing that we still don't have the flying cars. I think it's not going to come. And he shares that sadness. And in the context of what you're saying, it's part of the fairy tale that we were sold.
In the vein of that, I open up now. Does anyone have any stories, anecdotes that they'd like to share about experience that they have had with people at different stages in the grief cycle?
I can maybe share Amy's story. Amy is the person whose facility is this. Her son is, I think, 10, and he's dealing with this now. The first thing is when he realized this, he says like, "Mom, I still want to have sex." And she was just like, "Yeah, you should still have sex." You know? So yeah, the kids also realize, you know.
This is something that I engage often with as a millennial, is the difference between myself as a 24-year-old, someone who's 18 about now, and someone who's 13 or 14. The degree of technological integration that they've had has substantially changed the way that we think. So, for example, I have a colleague at work, and I told him about the climate crisis, and he was like, "Shit, this is a big thing." And he took it home, and within 5 minutes of starting that conversation, both of his kids were like, "Yeah, no, didn't you know this?" The children are well aware of it, but they're pouring themselves into social media, into games like Fortnite, which take over your life, into very superficial things, because they realize they don't have any power. But their power is in talking to their parents. I'm giving some talks at schools in Pretoria, hopefully, and one of the key things that I say is that it means a lot more to a parent for their child to come to them and say, "Well, like, what's happening with my future, Dad?" Then if they just hear about Extinction Rebellion and this counterculture movement, which just evokes memories of the 60s and drugs and sex and debauchery, and they don't take it very seriously. It's a lot more difficult if you can't answer your kid. And I don't even have kids, and I imagine it must be a nightmare. So hats off to parents in the room who have decided to take this on if your kids are very young.
This is not an anecdote, but I wanted to ask why XR here has distanced itself from the drone campaign at Heathrow.
So we haven't distanced ourselves. XR in the UK. So immediately after the drone protest was announced, there was an article published in quite a prominent journal, something like a newspaper in the UK, that said, no, Extinction Rebellion is a terrorist organisation. that they are here for anarchy and the end of the state, and it was because of the Heathrow protest that they wanted to interrupt the big mechanism of globalized industry, the ability for CEOs to fly in and out of London. And because of that, a lot of people in society immediately were like, oh, well, now we can't listen to Extinction Rebellion. Look, the government's saying that they're terrorists. It was an MI6 guy or high-ranking police official who was quoted in this article. So in order to protect the completely non-violent status of XR, they decided, let's put 1 degree of separation between ourselves. So Heathrow Pause became a movement in and of itself. And it was purely for the reason of we can't risk the idea that we're not non-violent, that we're a terrorist organization. Because as you'll see in the principles, and as you'll see, I think, in a little bit in Helene's presentation later, it is so important that we remain non-violent. And even the association of violence has the potential. Even
It
if,
also is a re-traumatizing of the spectacle of man heaven, really.
yeah, yeah.
Now, another dynamic that I believe plays into that. Another thing that plays into that is the fact that with the level of disruption caused by pausing Heathrow, literally flights bringing in urgent medical supplies, organs, and that kind of thing will be disrupted to the extent that people will die. And especially at a stage where we're still trying to get people on board, it becomes very, very problematic.
Yeah. It is in no short words, it is the most significant disruption you can probably make. And it is a disruption with profound consequences across an economy and across medical sectors. So it's really out there in terms of modern activism, so that